Beep, beep, beep. Alright, so I checked out this book. The MCAT Advanced Prep Guide. There's like a couple of chapters on like how to use the book. And then there's basics and test strategy. The path to medical school. The Medical College Admission Test, or MCAT, is a standardized multiple choice test administered by the American Association of Medical Colleges, or AAMC. It is the entrance exam for medical school. The MCAT is only offered on specific days of the year, usually about 30 days a year. Test dates range from January to September, with only a handful of dates in January and none in February. Every exam begins at 8 a.m. and is administered on a computer. Typically, the AAMC opens registration for the earlier exams in October of the previous year and for the later exams in February of the same year. Cost to register varies depending upon when registration is complete, and fees increase as the registration date approaches the test date. The AAMC does make exceptions. The red does not. The AAMC does make exceptions to the standard testing experience. Requests for accommodation should be applied for and approved well in advance. The MCAT. 3 of the 4 sections on the MCAT test are basic science content knowledge by requiring you to critically use the information rather than just provide individual scientific facts. Therefore, you should know how to integrate and analyze information in different contexts using various skills and content databases. The second section on test day, critical analysis and reasoning skills, is a unique part of the exam in that it is pure test of critical thinking. Passages on topics within the social sciences and humanities are presented, and then a series of questions asks you to reason about the material presented, just as you would be expected to do in medical school and in your medical careers. And then here's all the sections. Test. Scoring. Hey, it is cold out here. It's pretty chilly. No lie. MCAT reading is unlike any other reading that you have done in the past. In the same way that one reads a novel differently than a textbook, MCAT reading requires its own unique approach. Reading the Kaplan way involves noting keywords, proper usage, outlining and anticipating questions while reading. In passages, keywords are vital clues that point out the relationship between major themes, highlight the author's opinion, and elucidate the reasoning in a text. Passage outlining is essentially doing the writing process in reverse. You will learn how to extract an outline from each passage, which will serve as the roadmap to assisting in handling detail-oriented questions, as well as focus your reading on the most testable passage content. And finally, anticipating questions is all about understanding passage structure and how this is predictive of question types. Keywords. Oh, that's funny. Put some basic English in here. That's cool. How to attack different passage types. Question and answer strategies. Science of a healthy answer. Okay, this appears to be where the book actually begins, part 2. I'm gonna stay on my toes out here. Check mic and camera settings. Looks like the microphone's working. Volume is good. Check. See if that works any better. Hey, Sci-Fi Sit Dan, good to see you. I didn't see the comments just now. Just killing a little time. I'm gonna read this this study book while I'm out here. It's been a very, very slow night. As I say that, trucks will begin to pull up. Night 1, 2 to 4 was kind of dead time, and then I tried to do a reading stream the other night. It kind of bombarded me during that whole time. So I do have my notebook out so I can take notes. Oh yeah. Thanks for coming by, Sit Dan. Yeah, it was lovely seeing you yesterday. I'll probably talk more about my night last night later on in the day. I know it's late. Yeah, I have to work overnight, so that's my story. I'm sticking to it. But but I am planning on streaming possibly later or tomorrow, meaning Friday, because I do have a pretty busy day today. So all right. Scientific inquiry and reasoning skills. Chapter 4, Skills 1 and 2. There is no question that a high score on the MCAT requires extensive content knowledge in biology, biochemistry, general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, psychology, and sociology. That one's on the freeway. However, the MCAT is not a content test. One of the most common mistakes that test takers make when studying for the MCAT is treating it as if it is a content test and studying for it as if it is an undergraduate course. The MCAT is actually a critical thinking test designed to test your ability to apply your knowledge to new situations. In addition, questions on the MCAT have been expanded to include additional skills, such as the evaluation of experimental design and execution, as well as the interpretation of data and statistical reasoning. The AAMC has separated these categories into 4 skills, appropriately called Skills 1, 2, 3, and 4. In this chapter, we will discuss how the MCAT will test Skills 1 and 2. What are Skills 1 and 2? Unlike many tests administered to undergraduates, the questions are carefully crafted and tested to ensure that the MCAT tests the specific skills and content areas that the AAMC believes are most essential for success in medical school. To do this, the AAMC creates questions reflecting 4 different skills. Skills 1 and 2 are designed to evaluate your scientific knowledge and reasoning ability. Skill 1. Skill 1 is the simplest of skills, testing knowledge of scientific concepts and principles. These questions will be fairly straightforward, asking you to identify relationships between related concepts. Essentially, Skill 1 questions test your knowledge. Skill 1 questions test your content knowledge in a very specific manner. Skill 1 questions are designed to test the following: knowledge and recognition of scientific principles, ability to identify relationships between related concepts, ability to identify relationships between graphical, symbolic, and verbal representations of information, ability to identify observations that illustrate specific scientific principles, the application of mathematical principles to solve problems. Skill 2. Skill 2 is more complex than Skill 1 in that Skill 2 tests your scientific reasoning and problem-solving skills. Essentially, Skill 1 tests your content knowledge, whereas Skill 2 tests your ability to apply that knowledge. You will be asked to reason about scientific principles, models, and theories, as well as evaluate and analyze predictions and explanations related to scientific concepts. Overall, Skill 2 questions will test your critical thinking skills. But what are critical thinking skills? Critical thinking is a method of processing and using information. It has been defined as the process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information to reach an answer or conclusion. Critical thinking is not just memorizing information, it is using this information through higher order processing. However, critical thinking requires some level of knowledge about a topic, beyond basic memorization. One of the ways that we can tackle critical thinking is by changing how we learn information. Many students use memorization as a primary method of learning and are successful in passing undergraduate level science courses. But medical school is very different from undergraduate science courses. The volume of information is astounding, often covering the same volume of information in an entire semester of an undergraduate science course in 2 weeks or less. Medical students are expected to learn this information and be able to systematically apply this information to patient care. But without the gift of superhuman photographic memory, getting through medical school by brute force memorization is just not realistic. But more relevant to the MCAT, higher test scores result from the ability to think, analyze, and apply information you already know to situations and concepts you may not know. This particular skill is essential for medicine. You will have to apply the information you know about the human body to a patient about whom you may know little. So how can you improve your ability to learn and apply information? By focusing on your learning behavior. One of the tools used in educational psychology for assessing learning is known as Bloom's taxonomy. See Figure 4.1. In this taxonomy, there are 6 levels of intellectual behavior that are important for learning, which are as follows. Remembering. Can you recall the information? Understanding. Can you explain the information to a classmate? Applying. Can you apply the information to a new situation? Analyzing. Can you compare and contrast different parts of the concept? Can you differentiate between the details within the concept? Evaluating. Can you use the information to support a judgment based on the information? Creating. Can you incorporate the information to create another structure, document, or theory? In each content area on the MCAT, one or more elements of Bloom's taxonomy are being tested, regardless of the skill. When evaluating your knowledge of a particular subject, you can use Bloom's taxonomy to determine your level of learning and increase your level of learning. Try this step-by-step method for deepening your learning of a concept. Do you think you remember and understand a particular concept? Then explain it to a friend or classmate. If you can do that, then try to find situations that are different, but to which the same concept applies. Then compare and contrast the concept to a similar theory or concept. Once you can see the differences and the similarities, work through a passage and questions explaining why each answer choice is correct or incorrect. Finally, can you write something about a concept? Try to write a passage similar to one seen on the MCAT. Although it is unrealistic to do this for every topic on the MCAT because it would be highly inefficient, the levels of Bloom's taxonomy represent the different levels of learning that the MCAT requires. It also explains why so many students spend thousands of hours studying for the MCAT but are not successful on test day. Many focus only on the remembering part of learning and only a little bit on the understanding part. The secret to MCAT success on test day is not just in remembering the content, it is having a higher level of understanding of the content. You can complete all levels of Bloom's taxonomy with a concept. Then you not only really know that topic, but also are far more likely to recall that topic on test day. Memorized information does not have nearly the same level of recall as information that is deeply understood and able to be synthesized and actively used to solve problems. In other words, you are not going to remember everything you study for test day. In fact, it is unlikely that you will be comfortable with every single topic on test day. However, if you build your knowledge to such a degree that you focus on a deeper level of learning, you'll be able to use logic to go from what you do know to determine answers to questions you may not specifically know the answer to. Skill 2 questions specifically test the skills mentioned in Bloom's taxonomy. Skill 2 questions are designed to test the following abilities: to reason about scientific models, principles, and theories, to evaluate and analyze scientific predictions and explanations, to interpret and evaluate arguments regarding causes and consequences, to unify observations, theories, and evidence to come to conclusions, to recognize scientific findings that pose a challenge or invalidate a scientific theory or model, to identify and use scientific formulas to solve problems. So far, so good over here. How will skills 1 and 2 be tested? The differences between skills 1 and 2 require a different approach to assess whether you have acquired the reasoning skills that will help you be successful in medical school and as a physician. In this section, we will explore how the skills will be tested on each of the 4 question types, as well as how these questions will appear on test day. Skill 1. Skill 1 questions will be fairly simple. These often are easy points on test day, as long as you have conducted a thorough and effective content review prior to test day. However, getting Skill 1 questions correct on test day is only a small piece of earning a high score. You'll have to be proficient in all 4 skills. Discrete questions. Straightforward, direct questions, either addressing relationships between concepts or identifying a single detail or characteristics regarding a concept. Questions that stand alone from the passage. Very similar to discrete questions, often thematically related to the passage. Will require identification of a single concept or relationship without a multi-step reasoning process. Questions that require data from the passage. Will require minimal analysis of data from the passage, often connecting information from the passage to scientific concepts. Identification of a scientific concept with a graph or table may be required. A mathematical equation may be presented, and you may be requested to use this equation to solve a problem. Questions that require the goal of the passage. Skill 1 questions are unlikely to require this level of analysis. When they do, the questions will be simple and require identification of a relationship between a scientific concept and a fundamental piece of information in the passage. Skill 2. Skill 2 questions will be extremely common on test day. In fact, this was an extremely common question type on previous versions of the MCAT. Discrete questions will require you to understand a particular concept and then link that concept with the task of the question. No passage will be associated, thus, the scope of the answer will be limited to the scope of the question. Questions that stand alone from the passage. Much like discrete questions, but often thematically related to the passage, may require application of knowledge related to the passage but not specifically mentioned in it. Questions that require data from the passage. Likely to require calculations, evaluations of data, and connection of the data with scientific principles, and use of scientific data and knowledge to draw conclusions related to information presented in the passage. may require interpretation of, or analysis of graphs, tables, or diagrams. You may have to apply information obtained from the passage to a new situation not presented in the passage. You may be asked to analyze the relationship between two variables in terms of causation and correlation. Questions that require the goal of the passage will require you to interpret the passage as a whole and connect the passage with your knowledge about scientific principles or your knowledge about a natural or social phenomenon. May require you to identify arguments about cause and effect as supported by the passage or new evidence provided in the question stem. Information may be presented in the question stem that either strengthens or weakens the argument made in the passage. You will be asked to identify how this new information is related to the passage as a whole. You may be expected to draw conclusions from the information presented in the passage or evaluate the validity of a conclusion based on evidence from the passage. Getting the edge in Skill 1 and Skill 2 questions. Content knowledge is required for the MCAT, especially for Skill 1 questions. However, content knowledge is not enough for success on test day. The MCAT uses science as a vehicle to test critical thinking skills, especially on Skill 2 questions. To get the edge on Skills 1 and 2, a thorough and efficient content review must be coupled with a significant number of practice questions. A common mistake made by students when studying for the MCAT is focusing too heavily on content review and not enough on practice questions and passages. The only way to be successful on test day is to integrate content review with practice questions and passages. Success on Skill 2 questions requires that you acquire a deeper level of learning than what is required in undergraduate science courses. To do this, ensure that you review content and then immediately apply content to practice passage and questions. Every question that you answer incorrectly on a practice passage or question is an opportunity to review how you approach the question. Systematically reviewing questions to determine weaknesses in your critical thinking skills will help you identify and address those weaknesses. If you find that you are stuck at a score plateau on practice tests, it is essential to take an honest look at your critical thinking skills to break through that plateau. When the AAMC released the specifications for the 2015 MCAT, it established the expected distribution as 35% Skill 1 and 45% Skill 2 questions for each science section. Mind you, this is for the 2019-2020. Okay, so a whole set of skills. Enough. Handy dandy notebook. Now the 8th, right? Yeah, it's now the 8th. Happy February 8th. Writing's really sloppy all of a sudden. It was nice a few hours ago. Growing up, I always wanted to be a rock star and a doctor and an astronaut. So you'd be the first rock and roll MD to play a live show on the ISS. And I think there's still time. We can still accomplish this mission. It was the perfect night to wear my skiddy pants. Okay. Chapter 5, Skill 3. Modern medicine requires the practical application of research. As a physician, you will constantly be seeking answers in research to determine prognosis, assess the appropriateness of a treatment modality for a given patient, and answer patients' questions. Evaluation of research is critical to the progress of all fields of medicine and will be a key component of your life as a physician. Scratchy throat. To practice medicine in this way, certain basic skills are required, such as the ability to reason about the design and execution of research, otherwise known as Skill 3. In this section, we will discuss the specific characteristics of Skill 3, as well as how Skill 3 will be tested on the MCAT. What is Skill 3? Skill 3 is divided into two main components: concepts behind scientific research and reasoning about ethical issues in research. Concepts behind scientific research and reasoning about ethical issues in research. This means that you must understand how studies are designed using the scientific method as a guiding principle, plus the ethical issues present in research, especially in the use of human subjects. Behind scientific research and reasoning about ethical issues. Pen's about to die. In research. Skill 3 questions test. Skill 3 questions are designed to test the following: identification of the roles of past findings, theories, and observations in scientific inquiry, identification of testable hypotheses and research questions, ability to distinguish between samples and populations, and identify results that support generalizations about populations, identification of dependent and dependent variables. Identification of, is that a typo? Should be dependent and independent. It says dependent and dependent variables. With a question mark. So I can go research. Ability to reason about the features of research studies that suggest relationships among variables, including causality. Ability to draw conclusions from results produced by research studies. Identification of how results from research may apply to real-world situations. Reasoning skills with respect to ethical issues in scientific research. Fundamental concepts of Skill 3. Skill 3 questions will ask you to apply scientific concepts to your understanding of research in both the life sciences and the behavioral sciences. However, this information is rarely, if ever, covered in your undergraduate science classes. The scientific method is usually mentioned, but it is unlikely that it is covered in the level of detail that you will need on test day. In this section, we will discuss the basic concepts that you will need to be successful on Skill 3 questions. The scientific method. The scientific method is the basic paradigm of all scientific inquiry. It is the established protocol for transitioning from a question to a new body of knowledge. The steps in the scientific method are as follows. Generate a testable question. Occurs after observing something anomalous in another scientific inquiry or daily life. Gather data and resources. Phase of journal and database searches and information compilation. Look at all information, not just those consistent with the opinion of the investigator. Form a hypothesis. Once in the form of an if-then statement, which will be tested in subsequent steps. Often in the form of an if-then statement, which will be tested in subsequent steps. God, I really need my glasses. Time to order those up. All right, collect new data. Collect data by experimentation, manipulation and control of variables of interest, or by observation, usually involves no changes in the subject's environment. Analyze the data. Look for trends. Perform mathematical manipulations to solidify the relationship or relationships between the variables. Interpret the data and existing hypothesis. Consider whether the data analysis is consistent with the original hypothesis. If data is inconsistent, consider alternate hypothesis. Is that hypothesis or hypotheses? I feel like I'm asking English questions. Or that says of, or that's why we're taking notes. Publish. Provide an opportunity for peer review. Summarize what was done during the previous steps in the publication. Verify results. Repeat the experiment to verify results under new conditions. So just to recap, we don't know the scientific method, which we all should. Testable question. Is it testable? And it occurs after observing something anomalous, right? Observation. It's testable. It's observable. Okay. Gather all your data and resources, which maybe no resources needed if you're studying humans, right? You just have to watch the humans. What's your hypothesis? Collect more data because you have the hypothesis. Now you're trying to observe the process repeatedly, right? Analyze said data. Analyze the data. Don't forget about that. You just have raw data sitting there unanalyzed. Interpret the data as it relates to the hypothesis. I just misspelled interpret while I was looking at it. Nope, I got it right. Okay. So is that right? Publish, peer review. Let other people look at your data and your hypothesis and judge you. And then verify it with repeat experimentation. Is it repeatable? Boop, boop. No, this one. Okay. It's unusually quiet out here. I'm a little bit nervous. I saw a coyote out here yesterday morning, since it is now this morning. I was out here yesterday morning. Pretty sure it was a coyote. It was pretty small, much smaller than most like domestic dog breeds. It was really more like the size of a large cat. that had like a dog head. And then I scared it off, but then I fed it a slice of pizza. So I think it must have come back and gotten the pizza. Trying to feed the animals around here. Okay. Basic concepts in scientific research. Basic science research, the kind conducted in a laboratory, not on people, is generally the easiest to design because the experimenter has the most control. Often a causal relationship is being examined because the hypothesis generally states a condition and an outcome. Okay, see, that's hypothesis. The other one was hypotheses. Hypotheses. Now I see the difference. Always get those confused, right? Remember your English, people. Often a causal relationship is being examined because the hypothesis generally states a condition and an outcome. To make generalizations about our experiments, the outcome of interest must not be obscured. In addition, there also must be a method by which causality may be demonstrated, which is relatively simple in basic science research, but less so in other research areas. This requires the use of a control or standard and an identified set of variables. Controls. In basic science research, conditions are applied to multiple trials, of the same experiment that are as near to identical as possible. A control or standard is a method of verifying results. Controls also can be used to separate experimental conditions. Positive and negative controls are used as points of comparison, where a group of controls can be used to create a curve of known values. Positive controls are those that ensure a change in the dependent variable when it is expected. For example, if a new assay is developed for the detection of human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, infection, a number of blood samples known to contain HIV virus can act as a positive control. Negative controls ensure that the dependent variable does not change when no change is expected. For example, the same new HIV assay would be used to test samples known to be normal. In pharmaceutical trials, a negative control could be used to assess the placebo effect. An observed or reported change when an individual is given an inactive substance, such as a sugar pill, is an example of the placebo effect. Causality. By manipulating all of the relevant experimental conditions, basic science researchers often can establish causality. Causality is an if-then relationship and is often the hypothesis being tested. Independent variable. The variable that is manipulated or changed. Dependent variable. The variable that is measured or observed. If a change in the independent variable always causes a change in the dependent variable, and the change in the dependent variable does not change without change in the independent variable, then a relationship is said to be causal. Let's repeat that. If a change in the independent variable always causes a change in the dependent variable, and the change in the dependent variable does not change without change in the independent variable, then a relationship is said to be causal. So I just feel like I have to. Okay, so the dependent variable is simply the one that is being measured or observed. The independent variable is the one that is manipulated. So if the change in the manipulated variable always causes change in the unmanipulated variable, and the change in the unmanipulated variable does not change without change in the shit. Oh, this is frustrating. If the change, okay, so the independent variable manipulated or changed, dependent variable not manipulated or changed, measured or observed, right? So if the change in the independent variable always causes a change in the dependent variable, and the change in the dependent variable does not change without change in the independent variable, then the relationship is said to be causal. So is there another way of wording that, another way I could write this? Like, I'm trying to think of like some alternative to the way they're phrasing it. It seems like, okay, change independent variable, right? Independent variable causes change in the dependent variable, right? And the change in the dependent variable does not change unless it's affected by the independent variable. So the dependent variable would be constant unless, right? And so that's how you have the causal relationship. The effect of the independent variable, which you manipulated. I think I understand. All right, error sources. In basic science research, experimental bias is usually minimal. The most likely way for an experimenter's personal opinions to be incorporated is through the generation of a faulty hypothesis from incomplete early data and resource collection. Other sources of error include the manipulation of results by eliminating trials without appropriate background, or by failing to publish works that contradict the experimenter's own hypothesis. The low levels of bias introduced by the experimenter do not eliminate all error from basic science research. Measurements are especially important in the laboratory sciences, and the instruments may give faulty readings. Instrument error may affect accuracy, precision, or both. Accuracy, also called validity, is the ability of an instrument to measure a true value. Precision, also called reliability, is the ability of an instrument to read consistently or within a narrow range. Because bias is a systematic error in data, only an inaccurate tool will introduce bias, but an imprecise tool will still introduce error. Get my trusty bookmarker, like that. All right, I think we're going to wrap this one up. You use the bathroom, do a little bit of walking. Probably come back in a little bit. Still got a few hours to go here, so maybe we'll see you soon. Maybe we won't. You never know. Ape.